Mom banned me from her wedding and canceled my birthday because of her fiancé. So here's the thing. I'm Carly, 18, and I'm my mom's only daughter from her first marriage. She's got 3 younger kids with her new fiancé, Greg, all teenage boys. And yeah, I thought I'd at least get to be part of her wedding since, I'm her actual daughter. But nah, things didn't go how I expected at all, and now I'm left wondering what the hell just happened. Anyway, last week, I overhear my mom, Lisa, talking to one of her friends about her wedding plans. She's been with Greg for about a year, and the wedding's set for December, the day before my birthday. I was pretty excited at first because my mom and I had been talking about a party for my birthday too, like we were going to make it a whole thing. So when I heard her discussing the bridesmaids' dresses with her friend, I thought, hey, maybe I'll be a bridesmaid or something. She hasn't mentioned anything yet, but surely I'm included, right? Wrong. So I casually ask her, hey, when are we going to look for my dress for the wedding? You know, just trying to bring it up because she hasn't said a word about it. And I swear to you, the look she gave me, it was like I just told her I ran over her dog. She looked all disappointed and weird for a second. Then she said, we'll talk about it later. Later comes around, and I'm sitting there waiting for this big talk about my dress. But instead, she pulls me aside and hits me with this. Greg thinks it would be better if his kids were more involved in the wedding. Now let me pause for a second. His kids? Really? They're not even girls, they're all teenage boys. And I'm supposed to be cool with them just swooping in and taking over a wedding that I thought I'd be a part of? But that's not the worst part. Nope, she drops this on me like it's no big deal. You're not going to be in the wedding. Not going to be in the wedding. Let that sink in. My own mother's wedding, and I'm not invited. Why? Because Greg doesn't like me. He thinks it would make things awkward with his family if I was there. And you know why? Because I look too much like my dad. Yep, you read that right. Apparently, my face is the problem. I look too much like my dad from her first marriage, and Greg doesn't want his family to feel uncomfortable. So I guess the solution was just to uninvite me completely. Like, that's going to fix everything. At this point, I'm sitting there in shock, trying to process what she just said. I didn't even know what to say at first. I thought maybe it was some kind of joke, but nah, she was dead serious. I tried to stay calm because, well, what else could I do? But inside, I was fuming. How could she just drop me like that? I've always been her daughter, and now I'm just not good enough? Anyway, I try to bring up my birthday again because that's something we'd been planning together for a while. The wedding's literally the day before my birthday, and we'd talked about having a party. But she tells me the birthday's canceled because she and Greg are going on their honeymoon the day after the wedding. So basically, my birthday's not happening anymore either. At this point, I lost it. I mean, what was I supposed to do? I yelled at her. I said, I'm sorry I don't look enough like you for you to love me. And yeah, that was harsh, but I was mad. And it's true. Ever since I was little, I've known I'm different because I look like my dad. My dad told me that after I was born, she had postpartum depression, and she never connected with me like she did with the kids she had with Greg. Those kids, they all look like Greg, and she's obsessed with them. Meanwhile, I've just been this reminder of her past. It sucks to admit, but it's true. She never really treated me the same. My brothers, though, they got lucky. They look more like her, so they've always had a better relationship with her. Me? I've been on the outside for as long as I can remember. So, after I yelled that at her, things just exploded. Greg storms into the room because apparently my mom was crying after what I said. He starts going off on me, saying I disrespected her and that I needed to leave. Like, what the hell? I'm her daughter and I'm the one getting kicked out? But whatever. I grabbed my stuff and left. I went to my dad's place. I couldn't stay there any longer. Not after what happened. My dad was pissed when I told him. He was ready to call CPS on them, saying they had no right to kick me out like that. But I begged him not to. I didn't want to make things worse, and I didn't want to drag my stepbrothers into it. They're not involved in this mess, and I don't want them to get caught up in it. Even though we don't have a close relationship, they're just kids, and this whole thing is already bad enough. Later that night, I texted my brothers. They found out what happened, and honestly, they were more upset than I thought they'd be. All 3 of them told me they weren't going to the wedding now either. That surprised me because they've always been way closer to her than I have. But I guess even they could see how messed up this whole situation was. Now my mom's even more pissed because she's losing her other kids for the wedding. But I don't care. I'm not trying to fix this anymore. I've spent too long trying to be good enough for her, trying to make her happy. And I'm just done. It's still hard, though. As mad as I am, part of me still wants her to care, to change her mind. But deep down, I know she won't. Greg's her priority now, and I'm just not. It sucks, but that's where things are. I've got my dad, I've got my brothers, and I'm going to focus on them. It's not like I need her approval anymore, right? So, after everything went down, I thought maybe things would cool off. Like, yeah, I blew up at my mom, but deep down I figured she'd come to her senses eventually, right? I mean, she's still my mom. I thought there'd be a call or a text, something to at least acknowledge how messed up things were. But instead, nothing. Complete silence from her. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself, it's fine. I don't need her to reach out. I've got my dad and my brothers. I'll just move on. But the more days that went by without hearing from her, the more it started to mess with my head. It's like, how do you go from planning birthday parties and talking wedding stuff to completely ghosting your own kid? So one day I'm hanging out with my brothers and we're all kind of avoiding the elephant in the room. None of us are going to the wedding. I can tell they're pissed, but they don't want to say much about it because it's a weird situation for all of us. They've always been closer to mom, and now it's like they're stuck between her and me. I feel bad for them, but at the same time, I'm angry too. Like, why do they get to have a relationship with her while I'm just tossed aside because I don't fit into her new perfect family? At one point, my brother Josh asks if I've heard anything from mom, and I just laugh. Nah, not a single word. It's like I don't exist anymore. He gives me this sympathetic look, but I can tell he's torn. He doesn't want to say it, but I know what he's thinking. At least she still talks to us. And honestly, that hurts more than anything. I get why they're still in touch with her. They didn't say anything to get kicked out like I did, but it just feels like another reminder that I'm not as important to her. I try to brush it off, but later that night, after everyone goes to bed, I start scrolling through my phone, looking at old pictures. You know how it is. You start looking at one thing, and then, before you know it, you're going down a rabbit hole. I find all these photos from when I was younger, from before Greg was in the picture, and it's like looking at a completely different life. There's this one picture of me and my mom at my 10th birthday party. I'm grinning, and she's got her arm around me, smiling at the camera like we're the happiest people in the world. I don't even remember the last time we took a picture like that. It's like everything changed when Greg came into the picture. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, mom had been single for a while, so when she started dating him, I figured it was normal that she'd be focused on her relationship. But as time went on, it was like I became more and more invisible to her. Anytime I'd try to talk to her about something, she'd always bring it back to Greg or his kids, and when they started having kids together, it was game over. I wasn't part of the new family, and I knew it. The worst part is, I never really said anything about it. I didn't want to come off as bitter or jealous. I thought, this is what happens when your parent remarries. You just have to deal with it. But now, I'm wondering if I should have spoken up earlier. Maybe if I had, things wouldn't have gotten this bad. Maybe I wouldn't be sitting here staring at old photos, wondering why my own mom doesn't care about me anymore. Anyway, a few days go by, and my brothers and I are still avoiding the wedding topic. They haven't officially told mom they're not going, and I think they're hoping she'll reach out to them first so they don't have to make the decision themselves. It's like they're waiting for her to make the first move. I don't blame them, though. It's a tough spot to be in, and I know they're struggling with it too. Then one day, Josh calls me. He sounds weird, like something's up. And I can already tell it's about mom before he even says anything. He goes, Carly, you're not going to believe this. And I'm like, what now? Because honestly, at this point, nothing would surprise me. Apparently, mom called him and asked if he was still planning on coming to the wedding. When he told her he wasn't, she flipped. She started crying and saying how he was abandoning her and that she couldn't believe her own son would choose his sister over her. She kept saying how this was supposed to be the happiest time of her life and how she just wanted everyone to be there for her. Josh said he tried to explain that he couldn't support her treating me the way she did, but she wouldn't listen. She just kept going on about how it was all my fault that everything was falling apart. I wasn't even surprised. I mean, this is how she's always been, making everything about her. It's never her fault. It's always someone else who's to blame when things go wrong. And now she's putting the blame on me because her own kids don't want to go to her wedding? Yeah, okay. Josh told me he felt guilty, though. He didn't want to hurt her, but at the same time, he couldn't just ignore what she'd done to me. I get it. I don't want my brothers to feel like they have to pick sides, but it's hard when mom's acting like this. It's like she's forcing us all into a corner, and I hate that. So now, I'm stuck in this weird limbo where I'm not sure what to do next. I haven't heard from mom since Josh told her he wasn't going to the wedding, and part of me wonders if she's just given up on trying to make amends. Maybe she's too focused on her new life with Greg to care anymore. Or maybe she's waiting for me to reach out and apologize, which, yeah, that's not happening. I keep going back and forth in my head, wondering if I should have handled things differently. Should I have just kept my mouth shut? Should I have sucked it up and pretended like everything was fine? but then I remind myself that I shouldn't have to beg for my own mother's love and attention. I've spent enough time trying to make her happy, and it's never been enough. So why keep trying? In the end, I guess it doesn't matter what I do. Mom's made her choice, and I have to live with that. I can't change how she feels about me, and I'm done trying. Maybe it's time I start focusing on the people who actually care about me, my dad, my brothers, and stop worrying about someone who clearly doesn't. Update 1. So, after everything that's happened, I tried to distract myself from all the drama. I mean, there's only so much you can sit and think about before it just gets exhausting. But even when I'm trying to focus on other things, this whole situation with my mom is still there in the back of my mind. Like, I'll be doing something completely normal and then, boom, it hits me. My own mom doesn't want me at her wedding. How do you even wrap your head around that? But what really got me was when my dad sat me down for a conversation a few days later. He's usually pretty laid back, but I could tell something was bothering him. He goes, "Carly, we need to talk about your mom." And I'm like, great, just what I want to talk about. More of this mess. But he seemed serious, so I listened. Turns out my mom had reached out to him. Not to apologize, not to explain, but to complain. She told him that I'd ruined everything, that I'd turned my brothers against her, and that now the wedding was a complete disaster because none of her kids were going to be there. She actually said to him, if Carly hadn't thrown a fit, everything would have been perfect. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I knew she had a way of twisting things to make herself look like the victim, but to hear her flat out blame me for the mess she created, that hit hard. It's like she can't even take responsibility for her own decisions. She's acting like I'm the one who decided to uninvite myself from her wedding or something. My dad, being the good guy he is, tried to stay calm with her, but even he admitted that it was hard to listen to her go off like that. He told her, "Lisa, this isn't Carly's fault. You're the one who made her feel excluded. You need to fix this, not her." Of course, that didn't go over well. She just kept going on about how she'd already made her decision and that Greg's feelings came first. Now, I've heard that line a million times. Greg's feelings come first. It's like a broken record at this point. Ever since Greg came into the picture, it's been all about him and his family. If it's not what Greg wants, it doesn't happen. If Greg feels uncomfortable, we all have to bend over backward to make sure he's happy. And now, I guess that includes making me disappear from the wedding so his family doesn't get uncomfortable. What makes it worse is that, in her eyes, I'm the one causing all the drama. She's painting this picture where I'm the problem child, the one who's too difficult to deal with, and Greg's just the poor guy caught in the middle of all this chaos. And honestly, that hurts more than anything. I've spent years trying to be the good daughter, the one who doesn't make waves, and now I'm being blamed for everything falling apart. After talking with my dad, I started thinking about how things got to this point. Like, when did my relationship with my mom become so broken? I used to think it was because I look like my dad, and maybe that's part of it. But now I think it's more than that. It's like she's so caught up in building this perfect new life with Greg and his kids that there's no room for me in it. I'm this constant reminder of her past, of the life she had before Greg, and I guess she just doesn't want to deal with that anymore. But here's the thing. I'm still her daughter. No matter how much she tries to push me away, I'm not going to disappear just because it's more convenient for her. And I think that's what makes her mad. She can't just erase me, and it's easier for her to blame me for all the problems than to admit that maybe she's the one who's messed up. Anyway, after my dad and I talked, I started getting more texts from my brothers. They've been checking in with me a lot more, which I appreciate, but it's also been weird. I can tell they're struggling with this too, especially Josh. He's been pretty quiet lately, and when he does talk, it's always short and to the point. I think he's trying to keep things together, but I know he's hurt by what's going on with Mom. We all are. A few days later, Josh finally called me, and we had a real conversation. He told me that he'd been thinking a lot about the wedding, and that he felt bad for not telling Mom how he really felt. He said he wanted to stand up for me, but was scared of making things worse. And honestly, I get it. It's hard to stand up to someone when they've always had control over you. But Josh also told me something that I hadn't realized before. He said, "Carly, you've always been stronger than the rest of us. You're the only one who's ever really stood up to her. The rest of us just go along with it because it's easier, but you don't let her walk all over you." Hearing that kind of threw me off. I never thought of myself as the strong one. I just figured I was the one who couldn't keep quiet anymore. It made me think about how much we've all been putting up with over the years. My mom's controlling, yeah, but it's more than that. She's manipulative in a way that's hard to explain unless you've experienced it. She makes you feel like you're the problem, like you're the one who's always messing things up, and before you know it, you start to believe it. I've spent so long trying to be good enough for her, and it's exhausting. Josh told me that he's decided not to go to the wedding, not just because of what happened with me, but because he realized that it's not worth it to pretend like everything's okay when it's not. And hearing him say that made me feel less alone in all of this. It's like finally someone else sees what I've been dealing with. But then there's my other brother, Ben, who's still kind of on the fence. He hasn't said outright that he's not going, but I can tell he's thinking about it. He's always been the peacemaker in the family, the one who tries to keep everyone happy, and I think he's struggling with the idea of letting Mom down. But at the same time, he knows what she did to me was wrong. He just doesn't know how to handle it yet. So now, we're all in this weird limbo, waiting to see what happens next. The wedding's coming up soon, and none of us are sure how things are going to play out. Part of me hopes that maybe, just maybe, my mom will realize how messed up this all is and try to fix things. But I'm not holding my breath. She's too far down the Greg rabbit hole to see what's right in front of her. All I know is, I'm not going to let her make me feel like I'm the bad guy anymore. I'm done playing that role. If she wants to choose Greg over her own kids, that's on her. But I'm not going to sit around and let her blame me for the fallout. She made her choices, and now she has to live with them. Update 2. So, after Josh told Mom he wasn't going to the wedding, things got real awkward. It wasn't just about me anymore. Now she had to deal with the fact that none of her kids were backing her up. And honestly, part of me felt guilty. Like, yeah, I didn't want to go, but I didn't expect my brothers to completely ditch her too. It's just, everything feels so messed up now, and it's hard to know what the right thing is anymore. I hadn't heard from Mom at all, and the silence was getting weird. She was basically pretending like we didn't exist. No calls, no texts, nothing. But then, out of nowhere, Ben calls me one night. He's the peacemaker, like I said before, and I could tell something was up just from the tone in his voice. "Carly, we need to talk about Mom," he said. Great, here we go again, I thought. Apparently she called him and tried to guilt trip him into coming to the wedding. Classic mom move, really. She laid it on thick, saying stuff like, "You're my son, Ben, I've always been there for you. How could you do this to me?" The usual emotional manipulation. Ben's always been the one who struggled the most with standing up to her, and I could hear in his voice that it was getting to him. "I just don't know what to do," he admitted. "I don't want to hurt her, but I also can't stand what she did to you. This whole thing feels wrong." And that's when I realized how deep the damage went. It wasn't just about me getting kicked out of the wedding or Mom choosing Greg over us. It was about how for years she's been playing these mind games, making us all feel like we have to earn her love. And now it's all coming to a head because she's finally gone too far. I told Ben, "Look, you don't owe her anything. She made this mess, not you. If you don't feel right about going to the wedding, then don't go. But don't let her make you feel guilty for something that's her fault." Ben was quiet for a while, and I could tell he was wrestling with it. I get it. We've all been conditioned to think that making Mom happy is the most important thing. But at what cost? At some point, you have to stop sacrificing your own happiness for someone who doesn't care about yours. After that conversation with Ben, I started to realize just how much of our lives had been shaped by Mom's control. It wasn't just about her wedding or Greg. It was about how she'd always made us feel like we weren't good enough unless we were doing exactly what she wanted. And now, I was finally seeing it for what it was: manipulation. But it wasn't until I talked to Josh again that I really started to understand how deep this went. Josh called me a couple of days after Ben and I had our talk, and he sounded different, like something had shifted for him. "Carly, I've been thinking about everything," he started. "About Mom, about how she's treated you, treated all of us. And I think I'm done." I didn't really know what he meant at first, so I asked, "Done with what?" "With her," he said. "I'm done letting her control my life. I'm done pretending like I don't see what she's doing. This whole thing with the wedding, it's just the final straw. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not." Hearing that from Josh was a shock, honestly. Out of all of us, he'd always been the one who was the closest to Mom. He used to defend her, even when things were tough between her and me. So for him to say that, it hit hard. But it also made me realize that this wasn't just my fight anymore. We were all caught up in this mess, and we were all finally seeing things for what they were. We talked for a long time that night, and Josh opened up in a way he hadn't before. He told me about all the little ways Mom had made him feel like he wasn't good enough, like he always had to prove himself to her. And the worst part was, he never even realized it until now. He just accepted it as normal, like that's how a mother was supposed to be. But now, with everything happening, he couldn't ignore it anymore. "It's like, I've been blind this whole time," he said. "And now that I see it, I can't unsee it. I don't know if I can ever look at her the same way again. I felt the same way. It's like once the curtain gets pulled back, there's no going back to how things were before. You can't pretend everything's fine when you know it's not. That conversation with Josh really changed things for me. It made me realize that this wasn't just about me being hurt by mom's actions. It was about all of us coming to terms with the fact that our relationship with her was built on manipulation and control. And now we had to figure out how to move forward without letting her keep that power over us. The next few days were quiet. None of us talked to mom, and I think she was starting to realize that we weren't going to cave. But then, she showed up at my dad's house one evening. Yeah, she just showed up unannounced, like nothing had happened. I wasn't expecting it, and when I opened the door to see her standing there, I didn't know what to say. She looked tired, like the whole thing was wearing her down. But I wasn't about to feel sorry for her, not after everything. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than I was used to. I hesitated, but I nodded and stepped aside to let her in. We sat down in the living room, and there was this awkward silence for a while. I didn't really know what she was doing here, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever conversation was about to happen. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't realize how much this wedding was hurting you," she said. I didn't I didn't mean for things to get this bad." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she didn't mean for any of this to happen, but at the same time, I couldn't just let it go, not after everything she'd put me through. So I just sat there waiting to see what else she had to say. "I've been so focused on Greg and trying to make this wedding perfect," she continued. "I didn't stop to think about how it was affecting you." I was still quiet, not sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her that it was too late for apologies. But another part of me was just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of feeling like I had to prove myself to her. "I want to make things right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you." And that's when it hit me. She was scared. For the first time in a long time, she was actually scared of losing me. And while I appreciated the sentiment, I wasn't sure if it was enough to fix everything. Update 3. After that awkward talk with my mom, I thought maybe things would shift a little. Maybe she'd try harder, show that she really cared, you know? Like, I didn't expect everything to magically be fixed, but I guess I hoped for some kind of real effort. But surprise, it didn't exactly go that way. She left my dad's place that day with this promise of making things right. And for a few days, I waited. I kept my phone close, thinking maybe she'd call or at least send a text to try and follow up. But no, nothing. It was like that little conversation we had was just another attempt for her to feel like she'd done her part, without actually doing anything. The wedding was getting closer, and I still hadn't heard from her. Neither had my brothers. Josh was pretty much done at this point. He told me he didn't care if she ever reached out again. He was finished with all her guilt trips and emotional manipulation. Ben, though, he was still struggling. He kept saying stuff like, maybe she's just stressed with the wedding planning, like he was trying to justify her actions. But even he wasn't sure anymore. The silence was too loud. Then one afternoon, I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was spam, but when I opened it, my stomach sank. It was from Greg. He sent this long message about how I needed to apologize to my mom, how she was hurting because of everything I'd said, and how it was on me to fix this if I wanted any relationship with her in the future. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking a little. I couldn't believe it. This guy had the nerve to message me, telling me to apologize to her, like I was the one who needed to make things right. I didn't even know how to respond. Part of me wanted to throw my phone across the room, but the other part of me just felt numb. It was like nothing I did or said would ever be enough for her. I'd always be the one in the wrong, the one who had to fix things. I showed the message to Josh, and he was furious. "Don't you dare respond," he said. "That's just another way for them to try and make you feel like crap. You don't owe them anything." And he was right. I didn't owe them a damn thing. Not after everything they'd put me through. So I blocked Greg's number. I wasn't going to let him or my mom push me around anymore. But even though I knew I was doing the right thing by cutting them off, it still hurt. A lot. The idea that my own mom was siding with this guy, letting him talk to me like that, it was like a punch to the gut. I kept thinking back to all the times I'd tried to be the good daughter, to make her proud, and it never mattered. In the end, Greg was all that mattered to her. The days kept ticking by, and the wedding was only a week away. At this point, none of us had any intention of going. Josh and I had made up our minds, and even Ben was starting to come around to the idea that maybe staying away was the best choice. But then, 3 days before the wedding, I got another surprise. This time it was from my dad. He came home from work one night looking more tired than usual. He sat me down and told me that mom had reached out to him again. But this time, it wasn't just to complain. She wanted him to come to the wedding. Yeah, you read that right. My mom, who had been completely ignoring me and my brothers, suddenly decided that she wanted my dad, the guy she divorced years ago, the guy she basically treated like dirt for the last decade, to show up at her wedding to Greg. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why would she want you there? I asked. My dad shrugged, but I could tell he was as confused as I was. She said something about wanting to keep the peace for the sake of the kids, he told me. I don't know what she's thinking, Carly, but I told her no. Hearing that made me feel a little better. I don't know what kind of game my mom was playing, but I was glad my dad wasn't falling for it. He'd always been the one who tried to protect us from her manipulations, even when it put him in a tough spot. And now, he was standing up for me, for all of us. The wedding day finally rolled around, and it was weird. Like I knew it was happening, but it didn't even feel real. I stayed home with my brothers, and we didn't talk about it much. It was like this unspoken agreement that we weren't going to let her wedding ruin our day. We hung out, watched some movies, ordered pizza, and tried to act like it was just another Saturday. But deep down, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop wondering what was happening over there, what my mom was thinking, if she even noticed that her own kids weren't there. Part of me wanted to believe that she'd finally realize how much she'd messed up. But I knew better. She was probably too wrapped up in her perfect day with Greg to care. Later that night, after my brothers had gone to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos again. I don't know why I kept doing it, but it was like I couldn't stop torturing myself. There was this one picture of me and my mom from a few years ago. We were at the beach, and I had my arm around her. We both looked so happy. It didn't even feel real anymore, like that version of us was from a different life. I guess that's the hardest part. Realizing that the person you thought your mom was, the relationship you thought you had, was never really what you thought it was. I kept holding on to this idea that things could go back to the way they were, that if I just tried hard enough, she'd see me again, care about me again. But the truth is, she'd made her choice a long time ago. The next morning, I woke up to a message from an unknown number. For a second, I thought it might be her, reaching out after the wedding. But when I opened it, it was just a photo of her and Greg, all dressed up at their wedding, smiling like everything was perfect. And that's when I knew. I knew she wasn't going to change. She was too far gone. Greg had her wrapped around his finger, and I wasn't going to waste any more time waiting for her to realize what she'd lost. So I deleted the photo, blocked the number, and went downstairs to join my brothers for breakfast. It was time to move on.